The morning everything fell apart. The village of Thornwick woke up slowly, the way it always did, with the smell of bread from Marin's bakery drifting down the cobblestone lane, and the soft chime of wind bells above Elara Voss's shop door. Elara had been awake since before sunrise, as usual. Her fingers moved with practiced ease through bundles of dried chamomile, rosemary, and moon thistle. She tied each bundle with brown twine, labeled them in her careful handwriting, and arranged them in rows along the wooden shelves that lined every wall of her small healing shop. The shop was called the Hollow Stem. It wasn't a grand name, but it was hers. Every shelf, every dried flower, every little clay jar of salve had been built and filled by her own 2 hands over 7 years. She had started with nothing but old Wren's teachings and a stubborn refusal to give up, and she had turned it into something real. Something that mattered. People came from 3 villages away for her fever tinctures and her grief teas. That meant everything to her. Which was why the knock at the door at 7:30 in the morning made her stomach drop before she even opened it. The letter that shook her hands. The man at the door wore a grey territorial official's coat. He had a thin nose and thin eyes and the kind of expression that people wear when they have practiced delivering bad news without feeling anything. "Elara Voss," he said. "Yes," she answered carefully. He held out a sealed document. The wax stamp on it bore the crest of the Thornwick Land Registry. "This is a notice of land claim dispute. The property on which your shop stands has been filed under contested ownership by a Lord Caden Voss of the Eastern Holdings. Pending the outcome of the claim review, all business operations on this property are to be suspended within 48 hours. Elara stared at him. "I'm sorry," she said, very quietly. "Can you say that again?" He said it again. Word for word. Her hands were shaking when she took the document. She didn't remember closing the door, but she must have, because suddenly she was alone in her shop and the document was in her hands and the word suspended was burning a hole right through the paper. Caden. Her distant cousin. The man she had not spoken to in 3 years because he had borrowed money from her and never returned it and then pretended not to know her at the winter festival. Caden had filed a land claim on her property. The property her mentor old Wren had signed over to her legally, witnessed and sealed, 6 years ago. She sat down on the wooden stool behind the counter and breathed. Marin and the market square. Marin arrived 20 minutes later with a warm roll and zero awareness of the crisis unfolding until she read Elara's face. "What happened?" Marin said immediately, setting the roll on the counter. Elara slid the document across. Marin read it. Her eyebrows climbed steadily toward her hairline. "Caden," she said. The word carried an entire paragraph of feeling. "That absolute." "Marin." "I'm going to say it, Elara." "Please don't. I'm trying to think." "Thinking is not going to be enough. You need to go to the land registry office and you need to go today." Marin slapped the counter with her palm. "Before the convoy arrives and every official in this village is too busy bowing to actually do their jobs." "What convoy?" Elara looked up. "The Alpha King's convoy." Marin lowered her voice as if the walls had ears. "They announced it this morning. Dorian Ashveil is doing a territorial inspection. He'll be passing through Thornwick by midday. The whole square is already setting up banners. Half the village girls are trying to find something to wear." Elara hadn't heard any of this. She had been too deep in rosemary bundles and morning quiet. She rubbed her face and stood up. "Okay. I'll go to the registry office first. Will you watch the shop?" "Obviously," Marin said, already moving behind the counter. The collision in the square. Elara moved quickly through the village square, her brown leather satchel bouncing against her hip, the land document folded and tucked securely inside. Thornwick Square was already in the early stages of festive disruption. A cart of decorative banners had tipped and people were arguing about which direction the royal colors should face. A group of children were chasing a goat that had somehow acquired a string of pennants around its neck. She was reading the corner of the registry document as she walked, distracted by a clause in the legal language that didn't make sense to her, when she stepped directly into something solid. Not something. Someone. The impact knocked the satchel from her shoulder. Papers scattered. She grabbed for them and looked up at the same moment, a sharp apology already forming on her lips. The words dissolved. The man standing in front of her was tall in a way that made the square feel smaller. He wore dark riding clothes with no visible insignia, but the way he carried himself was different from anyone she had ever seen, like the ground reorganized itself slightly to accommodate him. His jaw was sharp. His eyes were a deep, storm-colored gray. And he was staring at her with an expression that flickered between composure and something she couldn't name. Then the scent hit her. It was cedar bark and cold iron and something underneath that, something warm and ancient that her instincts responded to before her mind could catch up. Her inner wolf, which she kept quiet and carefully managed, lurched forward inside her chest like a compass needle snapping toward north. The man went completely still. He was staring at her the way people stare at something they weren't prepared to find, with eyes that had gone slightly wide and a jaw that had tightened like he was holding something back with considerable effort. "I'm sorry," Elara managed. She crouched and gathered her papers, forcing herself to look away from his face because looking at it was doing something strange to her pulse. "I wasn't watching where I was going." "Neither was I," he said. His voice was low and unhurried. The kind of voice that expected silence to follow it. She stood, papers clutched to her chest. "Are you all right?" A pause. Something unreadable moved across his expression. "No," he said. And then he said nothing else. Before she could ask what he meant, Commander Silas Drex materialized from the crowd with the energy of a man who had been looking for someone and was deeply relieved to find him. "Your Majesty," Silas said quietly, stepping close. "The registry officials are waiting." The two words landed like stones in still water. "Your Majesty." Elara's eyes moved back to the man in front of her. Something cold and then very warm moved through her in quick succession. She took one small step backward. King Dorian Ashveil looked at her, not at the ground, not at Silas, directly at her. "Find out her name," he said quietly to Silas, still holding her gaze. Then he walked away, and the crowd closed around him, and Elara stood in the middle of the square with scattered papers and a heartbeat she didn't recognize as her own. The name behind the storm. Elara Voss did not sleep that night. She lay on the narrow cot in the back room of the hollow stem, staring at the ceiling with her hands folded on her stomach, listening to the wind move through the Thornwick streets. The village had gone quiet hours ago, the banners from the royal convoy visit now hanging limp in the stillness. But inside her chest, nothing was quiet. Nothing was even close to quiet. She kept replaying it. The collision. The scent. The way his grey eyes had held hers without apology or hurry, like he had all the time in the world and had simply decided to spend a portion of it looking at her. And then Silas Drex's voice cutting through the moment like a blade through silk. "Your Majesty." She pressed her palms against her eyes. "King Dorian Ashveil. The Alpha King of the 5 Wolf Territories. The man who had rebuilt 3 broken pack alliances before the age of 30. The man whose name was spoken in Thornwick the way storms were spoken about, with respect and a little fear and the quiet understanding that you did not stand in the middle of one and expect to come out unchanged. That man had looked at her and told his commander to find out her name. Elara sat up in the dark. "Absolutely not," she said aloud to no one. Rune, her small grey cat who slept at the foot of the cot, opened one eye and then closed it again with complete indifference. "I agree," Elara told him, and lay back down, and did not sleep at all. Marin brings news and chaos to Getherby morning. Marin was at the door before Elara had finished her tea. She came in fast, cheeks flushed, bakery flour still on her collar, with the expression of someone carrying information that was physically too large to hold. "They know your name," Marin said. Elara set her cup down slowly. "Who does?" "The royal commander. Silas Drex. He went to the registry office yesterday after the convoy settled at the lodge. He asked the clerk specifically about the land dispute filing under the name Elara Voss." Marin grabbed Elara's wrist across the counter. "Elara. The Alpha King's people are looking into your land case." The silence that followed was the kind that has texture. "That could be a coincidence," Elara said. Marin stared at her with the patience of someone who had been her best friend for 11 years. "You collided with the Alpha King in the square and now his commander is personally investigating your legal dispute and you're suggesting coincidence." "I'm suggesting I don't read into things. You're suggesting you're terrified." Elara picked up her tea again. "The registry office opens at 9. I'm going to handle this myself the way I handle everything. Through proper channels and paperwork and not through," she gestured vaguely at the air, "kings." Marin opened her mouth. A knock at the shop door interrupted her. The summons she refused it was not Silas Drex himself. It was a young royal attendant, barely 17, in a pressed coat 2 sizes too large, holding a small sealed note with both hands like it was something sacred. The note was brief. The handwriting was clean and authoritative. Miss Voss. Your presence is requested at the Royal Lodge at noon. A matter of the land dispute has come to our attention and we would discuss it with you directly. Commander S. Drex, on behalf of King Dorian Ashveil. Elara read it twice. She folded it precisely in half. She handed it back to the attendant. Tell the commander thank you, she said pleasantly, but I have a prior engagement. The attendant blinked. It's from the king's prior engagement, Elara repeated, with a smile that was warm and absolute. The boy left. Marin watched the whole exchange from behind a shelf of lavender bundles with her hand pressed over her mouth. You just refused a royal summons, Marin whispered. I refused an invitation, Elara corrected. There's a difference. I'm not a pack subject being commanded. I'm a private citizen being requested. And I have a land registry appointment at 9. She untied her apron, hung it neatly on the hook by the door, and reached for her satchel. Lock up if you leave, please. The door she bolted. The registry appointment was less satisfying than she had hoped. The clerk was sympathetic but ineffective. Caden's claim had been filed with enough forged documentation that untangling it would take days, possibly longer. Elara walked home through the afternoon streets of Thornwick feeling scraped hollow, and when she arrived at the hollow stem and saw the royal attendant waiting again outside the door, this time with a second note, she walked past him, went inside, and slid the bolt across the door. She heard him knock politely. She began organizing her herb jars. He knocked again. She moved to the back room and started labeling the new tincture bottles. Eventually the knocking stopped. She exhaled. She sat down at her workbench, pulled out her ledger, and tried to focus on numbers that blurred in front of her tired eyes. Outside, Thornwick went on with its ordinary afternoon sounds. A cart wheel. 2 women arguing about a fence line. Birds in the oak tree at the corner. And then, much later, as the light through the shop windows was going amber and long, she heard footsteps on the cobblestones outside that were different from all the others. Slower. More deliberate. The kind of footsteps that belonged to someone who had never in their life been in a hurry because the world had always adjusted its pace to match theirs. They stopped outside her door. A paused, then a single knock. Not hard. Not demanding. Just one clean, certain knock that somehow carried more authority than a dozen frantic ones. Elara did not move. Silence. Then his voice, low and unhurried and completely, infuriatingly calm, came through the wood of the door like it wasn't even there. Elara Voss, Dorian Ashveil said. I know you are inside. I can hear you breathing. She pressed her lips together and said nothing, her pulse hammering traitorously against her throat. I am not here as the Alpha King, he continued. I am here because something that is yours is being taken unfairly and I have the means to stop it. And I am also here because, a pause, brief and weighted, I have not been able to think about anything else since yesterday afternoon. Which is new for me. And inconvenient. The shop was so quiet she could hear the candle on her workbench flickering. I am going to count to 10, Dorian said. She heard him count. Quietly. Evenly. 1 through 10. Then there was a silence that lasted exactly 2 seconds. And then the door came off its hinges. Nowhere to hide. Not violently, or rather, not carelessly. The wood cracked and the bolt snapped and the door swung inward, and Dorian Ashveil stood in the frame of it with his dark riding coat and his storm-grey eyes and his expression that was not angry but was absolutely, completely done with waiting. Elara stood at her workbench with a tincture bottle in each hand, staring at him. He looked at the broken door. Then at her. I will have that replaced, he said calmly. Tonight, she set the bottles down with exaggerated care. Broke my door. You bolted it because I didn't want company, I noticed. He stepped inside, ducking slightly under the low doorframe. The shop, which had always felt adequately sized to Elara, suddenly felt like a teacup. He looked around at the shelves, the bundled herbs, the rows of labeled jars, the soft evening light catching the dust motes in the air. Something in his expression shifted, not softened exactly, but opened, like a shutter moving a fraction. You built all of this yourself, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes, she said, folding her arms. And your cousin is trying to take it. Caden Voss is not my cousin, Dorian said. He is yours. And he is a liar. And by tomorrow morning, His false claim will be struck from the registry and his documentation will be reviewed by territorial enforcement. He looked at her steadily. It is handled. Elara stared at him. Just like that, just like that. And what do you want in return? She said, her voice careful and guarded. Dorian was quiet for a long moment. The candle between them flickered. Nothing that can be demanded, he said finally. Only what is given freely. His jaw tightened slightly, like the words cost him something. I am not practiced at this, Miss Voss. I am practiced at strategy and governance and making decisions that nobody questions. I am not practiced at standing in a small herb shop with a broken door trying to explain to a woman who won't even open her door that she is the first person in 11 years who has made me feel like the ground shifted. The shop was absolutely silent. Elara's arms slowly uncrossed. You broke my door, she said again. But her voice was quieter now. I'll build you a better one, he said. And for the first time since yesterday afternoon, something in Elara's chest that had been wound tight and defensive and careful began, just barely, to loosen. The morning after the new door arrived before sunrise. Elara heard the carpenters working by lamplight, 2 men sent from the royal lodge with tools and fresh timber and the quiet efficiency of people who had been told to finish before dawn. She sat wrapped in her shawl at the workbench, Rune pressed warm against her side, and listened to the sound of something broken being made whole again. Dorian had stayed for 1 hour the night before. They had talked, carefully at first, circling each other like 2 people learning the temperature of water before stepping in. He had sat on the stool across from her workbench and she had made tea without asking if he wanted any, and he had accepted the cup without remarking on it, and somehow that small ordinary exchange had been more intimate than anything she had expected. He told her that the mate bond had hit him in the square like walking into a wall. She told him it had hit her the same way. Neither of them said what came next, because neither of them was ready, and somehow that was also the right thing. When he left, he paused in the empty door frame and looked back at her. The claim will be cleared by morning, he said. Thank you, she said. A pause. Don't bolt the next door, he said. Don't give me a reason to, she answered. And the corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but the architecture of one, and he left. Old Ren Speaksmarin arrived at 8 and immediately noticed the new door. She ran her hand along the frame with wide eyes and then looked at Elara with an expression that contained an entire festival of emotions compressed into one face. Later, Elara said, absolutely not, Marin. Fine. Later, Marin pointed. But I want every detail. Old Ren arrived at 9, which was unusual. The village elder and Elara's mentor was a compact, deliberate woman of 72 who moved slowly and thought fast and had the eyes of someone who had witnessed enough history to stop being surprised by most of it. She came through the new door, paused to examine the fresh timber with quiet approval, and then sat in the worn chair by the window that had always been hers. Elara set tea in front of her without speaking. She could feel something coming in the quality of Ren's silence. I heard the king was here last evening, Ren said. News moves fast in Thornwick, it always has. Ren wrapped both hands around her cup. I also heard what happened in the square. The collision. She looked at Elara over the rim. The bond. Elara said nothing. I need to tell you something, Ren said. I should have told you years ago. I told myself I was protecting you, but I think I was also protecting myself from a conversation I didn't know how to have. She set her cup down. Your mother was not who you were told she was. The shop went very still. The Silver Moon line. Ren spoke for 20 minutes without stopping, and Elara listened without speaking, and by the time the old woman finished the tea in both their cups had gone cold. Elara's mother, Ren explained, had not been a common Omega herbalist who died of winter fever when Elara was 4. She had been the last daughter of the Silver Moon bloodline, an ancient lineage that ran unbroken through 12 generations of wolf history, a line prophesied in the oldest pack records to produce the true queen of the Alpha King's reign. Her mother had run from that destiny, had hidden herself in Thornwick under a common name, had loved a quiet man and built a quiet life, and had made Ren swear before she died to keep the secret until Elara was old enough and strong enough to survive knowing it. She wanted you to have a normal life first, Ren said. She wanted you to know who you were before you knew what you were supposed to be. Elara sat with this for a long time. The land claim, she said finally. Caden knew. Ren nodded slowly. Caden discovered the bloodline records in your mother's old correspondence. He filed the land claim to destabilize you, to flush you out of Thornwick before the Alpha King's visit made the bond a possibility. He knew that if Dorian Ashveil recognized his true mate, Caden's hold over the Eastern holdings would be threatened. A silver moon queen would overturn every arrangement he had built on false ground. Elara pressed her fingers to her temple. He tried to take my shop to stop a prophecy. Fear makes people do extraordinary things, Wren said quietly. So does love. The unraveling of Caden Voss. By midday, Thornwick Square had become a courtroom. Commander Silas Drex had moved efficiently. The forged documents in Caden's land claim had been traced to a registry clerk Caden had bribed 6 months prior. 2 witnesses from the Eastern Holdings had come forward, quietly, carefully, under the assurance of royal protection, with testimony about Caden's scheme. Territorial enforcement had arrived before breakfast. Elara stood at the edge of the square and watched Lord Caden Voss, who had arrived in Thornwick that morning with the confidence of a man who still believed he had the upper hand, be formally escorted from the village square by 2 royal guards while the entire population of Thornwick watched in the specific charged silence of a community watching justice arrive later than expected but arrive nonetheless. Caden looked at Elara as they walked him past her. She held his gaze. She didn't say anything. There was nothing that needed to be said. Marin, standing at Elara's left shoulder, said enough for both of them under her breath. The king who came without his title. Dorian found her that afternoon in the hollow stem's small back garden, where she had gone to be quiet among the growing things. She was on her knees in the soil, pulling dead growth from around the base of a rosemary bush, her hands dark with earth, her hair loose around her shoulders. She heard his footsteps on the garden path and didn't turn around. "You could have sent Silas," she said. "I could have," he agreed. She heard him stop a few feet behind her. "I didn't want to." She sat back on her heels and finally turned to look at him. He had left the formal riding coat behind. He was in a plain dark shirt with the sleeves pushed up, and he looked less like a king standing in her garden and more like a man who had walked a very long way to get somewhere and had finally arrived and wasn't entirely sure what to do with the relief of it. "Wren told me," Elara said. "About the bloodline." "Silas told me this morning," Dorian said. "I want you to know," he paused, seemed to choose his words with unusual care, "it changes nothing about why I am standing in your garden. I was standing in that square before anyone told me anything about silver moons or prophecies." The bond arrived without a single piece of documentation. Elara looked at him for a long moment. There was soil on her hands and a broken evening light coming through the garden gate, and somewhere in the oak tree the same birds from yesterday were making their ordinary sounds. "I have built everything I have by myself," she said. "I need you to understand that. I am not looking to be rescued or claimed or placed into a destiny I didn't choose." "I know," Dorian said. He took one step closer. "I am not offering rescue. I am offering," he seemed briefly, unexpectedly uncertain, which looked extraordinary on his face, "myself. Which is admittedly a complicated package. But it is genuine." The garden was very quiet. "You broke my door," Elara said, for the 3rd and final time. "I did," he said. He held her gaze without flinching, "and I would do it again. Because you were on the other side of it." Elara looked at her earth-dark hands. Then she looked up at the Alpha King crouching down to her level in her small back garden with grass staining the knees of his riding trousers and an expression on his face that was stripped entirely clean of armor. She reached out and put her soil-covered hand in his. "The door you're building me better," she said, "had better have a good lock." His fingers closed around hers, careful and certain. "It will," he said quietly. "And I will always knock first." Epilogue. What the village remembers. Thornwick remembered that spring for a long time afterward. They remembered the royal convoy and the broken door and the way Lord Caden Voss had been walked through the square with his borrowed confidence finally empty. They remembered old Wren sitting in her chair by the hollow stem window, watching it all with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had been carrying a secret for 26 years and had finally set it down. They remembered Elara Voss standing in her back garden with soil on her hands and a king at her level, and the particular quality of the light that afternoon, golden and unhurried, falling over both of them equally. And Marin, who remembered everything and told it better than anyone, always ended the story the same way. "She never bolted the new door," Marin would say, breaking a piece of bread and passing it across the table. "Not once. Not ever. And some things, once opened, are far too full of light to close again. Sparkles the end sparkles."